Joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News, I'm Mark Broom. Let's start with a look at the day's headlines. From his palatial home in southern Seoul to a small solitary confinement cell, ex-President Lee Myung-bak is behind bars this morning following his arrest on corruption charges. Could rising trade tensions spill over into an all-out trade war? US President Donald Trump increases the chances, imposing massive new tariffs on China, but a planned steel tariff on South Korea is lifted, for the time being at least. Plus, President Trump replaces his national security advisor. H.R. McMaster is out the door. Former US ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, is in. We start with the arrest of ex-President Lee Myung-bak on corruption charges. He was taken from his home in southern Seoul late last night to a detention center in the east of the capital. Let's connect to our Cha Sang-mi standing by outside the detention center to tell us more about the situation after the court's decision to issue an arrest warrant for the former leader. So Sang-mi, ex-President Lee Myung-bak has spent his first night behind bars. What's the latest?
That's right, Mark. It's been 10 hours since the former president arrived here at the Seoul Eastern Detention Center behind me in Songpagu District, southeastern Seoul. He was brought here just past midnight after the Seoul Central District Court has issued an arrest warrant against him after an hour earlier. Before leaving his home, the former president posted a photograph of a handwritten statement on his Facebook, saying, quote, "I don't blame others. Everything is my fault, and I feel remorse." Lee's legal team expressed regret over this decision and said that this is the start of a long fight, signaling their plan to challenge each of the allegations in court. As for the interrogation, the prosecutors this morning said there will be no questioning today, considering Lee's old age and the busy schedule of his first day of detention, which includes a medical examination, but said they will be visiting the detention center for questioning in the near future. Normally, suspects processed by the Seoul Central District Court are detained at the Seoul Detention Center in Gyeonggi-do Province. But the court decided to hold Lee at the Seoul Eastern Detention Center, considering another former president, Park Geun-hye, is being held at the Seoul Detention Center. Lee is to be kept in solitary confinement on the 12th floor in a cell that's just 10 square meters big. That sounds small, but it's almost double the size of an average solitary cell, and also includes a TV set and separate shower facilities.
So Sang-mi, Lee Myung-bak joins a long list of ex-Korean presidents who have landed themselves in jail due to their corrupt dealings.
Right, Mark. It's been about a year since Lee's successor, Park Geun-hye, was arrested on March 31st, 2017, after over some serious corruption charges, including bribery and abuse of power. Her trial, however, is coming to a close, and the prosecutors are demanding her to serve about 30 years in jail. With his arrest, Lee becomes the fourth living former Korean president to have been detained over past corrupt practices. The 76-year-old faces at least 14 charges, the most serious of which is receiving $10 million in bribes from businesses and agencies. Other charges include embezzlement, tax evasion, and a violation of election law. This also marks the first time in 23 years that two ex-presidents are detained at the same time. Ex-presidents Chun Doo-hwan and Roh Tae-woo were jailed for mutiny and corruption in 1995, but were released 2 years later through a presidential pardon. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much for that report, Sang-mi. So we're going to shift our focus now to the United States. President Trump has signed a memorandum paving the way for sweeping tariffs worth up to $60 billion on Chinese goods. For more, let's turn to our Noah Adam, who has been following this story for us. So Adam, this trade dispute between the Trump administration and China has been simmering for some time now, and now Trump has thrown the first punch. What did he have to say?
Well, Mark, President Trump accused China of what he called years of intellectual property theft and Chinese pressure on American companies to hand knowledge over. He also reiterated his concerns over the growing trade deficit between the two countries.
But we have a trade deficit, depending on the way you calculate, of $504 billion. Now, some people would say it's really $375 billion. Many different ways of looking at it, but any way you look at it, it is the largest deficit of any country in the history of our world. It's out of control.
He went on to say that the punitive tariffs would benefit the US, adding that every trade deal had to be reciprocal.
And groups of countries. And frankly, it's going to make us a much stronger, much richer nation. The word is reciprocal. That's the word I want everyone to remember. If they charge us, we charge them the same thing. That's the way it's got to be. That's not the way it is. For many, many years, for many decades, it has not been that way.
Now, Adam, strong words there from President Trump, but China has already said that it's going to retaliate now. It is accusing the US of abusing global trade rules. What else did Beijing have to say?
Well, Mark, China has issued a belligerent response, with its embassy in Washington vowing to, quote, fight to the end in any trade war with the United States. Beijing's Commerce Ministry also announced through a statement on Friday that China plans to slap tariffs of its own on $3 billion worth of American imports ranging from steel to pork. It added that Beijing also plans to take legal action against the US under the World Trade Organization framework. However, it did say that Beijing is willing to resolve the trade dispute with Washington through dialogue. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Adam, and we'll be connecting to you again shortly. Now, staying with all this trade trouble we're seeing around the world at the moment, South Korea's steel exporters can breathe a sigh of relief, at least for a few more weeks. The United States has placed a temporary tariff exemption on steel and aluminium imports from a number of countries, and that includes South Korea. Jaein with the details.
Hours before the steel and aluminum tariffs were to go into effect, U.S. President Donald Trump put a pause on a number of countries and regions, including the EU. But more importantly, the list includes South Korea, the #3 steel exporter to the U.S. According to the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer on Thursday, the idea that President Trump has is that based on a certain set of criteria, some nations should be left off. The temporary exemption is aimed at finding a more permanent solution to Washington's concerns of steel and aluminum dumping. Under the measures, the U.S. will impose tariffs of 25% on steel imports and 10% on aluminum imports for countries not listed in the temporary exemption. According to South Korean Trade Minister Kim Hyun-jong, the temporary exemption will last until the end of April for now, as the nation will continue to negotiate on the conditions for a permanent exemption. The announcement comes as Seoul and Washington continue talks to renegotiate their free trade agreement, with South Korean officials, including Kim, lobbying in Washington in recent days to earn the tariff exemption. South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa recently said a trade row at a time when both allies are trying to make progress in efforts to denuclearize the North would not be helpful, citing the importance of maintaining a united front on the North Korean nuclear weapons issue. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, President Moon Jae-in, on a 3-day state visit to Vietnam, has vowed to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and has called for increased economic cooperation between Seoul and Hanoi. Our chief Blue House correspondent Moon Gon-young reports.
Standing before nearly 400 South Korean nationals living in Vietnam, as well as Vietnamese with links to South and North Korea, President Moon Jae-in declared his determination to achieve a denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and carry out his proposed constitutional amendment.
한반도 비핵화와 항구적 평화도 또 나라의 기틀을 새롭게 하는 개헌도 잘 이루어내겠습니다.
Speaking on the first evening of his three-day state visit to the Southeast Asian country, the South Korean leader said his country stands before a critical transition which will forever change history.
이제 곧 남과 북, 미국과 북한의 정상이 연이어 만나게 됩니다. 결코 놓쳐서는 안 될 소중한 기회입니다. 과정도 조심스럽고 결과도 낙관하기 어렵지만 저는 대한민국의 저력을 믿습니다.
President Moon also called for a boost in cooperation and exchange between South Korea and Vietnam, calling the Southeast Asian nation a core partner country for his new Southern policy. It's an initiative aimed at better connecting South Korea to Southeast Asia and expand the economic clout of Asia's fourth largest economy in the region, home to more than 500 million people. In the last 25 years of diplomatic ties, Vietnam has become South Korea's fourth largest trading partner, while South Korea is Vietnam's second largest and the biggest investor nation. The South Korean leader arrived in Hanoi Thursday afternoon and is set to hold a bilateral summit with Vietnamese President John Bolton and meet with top Vietnamese officials, including the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, the Prime Minister, as well as the Chairwoman of Vietnam's National Assembly on Friday. 문건영, Arirang News, Hanoi.
The U.S. State Department says Washington is preparing for the U.S.-North Korea summit based on what South Korea has said about the proposed meeting. While North Korea is yet to confirm the summit, State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert says the U.S. fully trusts Seoul to help them prepare for the unprecedented meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Meanwhile, with the U.S. slapping heavy tariffs on China, Nauert said the U.S. believes it won't affect denuclearization efforts, adding that China knows it will be more profitable for them if Pyongyang abandons its nukes. There has been yet another major shake-up at the White House. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster has agreed to resign and will be replaced by former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. President Trump announced the change in a tweet, thanking McMaster for his service and saying the handover to Bolton would take place on April 9th. This comes hot on the heels of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's firing last week and nominating CIA Director Mike Pompeo in his place. Both replacements are considered hawkish hardliners, especially Bolton, who has consistently expressed skepticism over dialogue with North Korea and advocated military action. A White House official said the timing of the firing was not related to any one incident, but with the US-North Korea summit slated for May, Trump appears to be putting together a far more hardline team before his meeting with Kim Jong-un. President Moon Jae-in's constitutional amendment plan calls for a 4-year, 2-term presidential system. The final part of his administration's amendment bill, announced on Thursday, also includes plans to reduce presidential power and reform the election and judicial systems. Hwang Ho-jun with the details.
If the government's proposed revision to the Constitution is ultimately approved, South Korea will see a major change in rule of the president, the length of his or her term in office, and a shift in the balance of power between the branches of government.
Now is the time to implement a 4-year, 2-term presidential system to bring about responsibility in politics and a stable management of state affairs. This is the will of the people.
30 years ago, when the South Korean constitution was last amended in 1987, the president's term of office was limited to 5 years with no possibility of re-election. That stipulation was put in as South Korea came out of a long period of military dictatorship. But today, the Blue House stressed that times are different now, as exemplified by the so-called Candlelight Revolution and its culmination last year. The Moon administration said that the Korean people are way ahead of the nation's politicians when it comes to the ability to practice democracy, and so it's proposing a 4-year, 2-term presidency. However, the Blue House emphasized that the new system will be applied starting with President Moon Jae-in's successor. The government's proposal stipulates that Moon's term will end as currently scheduled on May 9, 2022. If the new system is adopted, the number of national elections taking place during a single presidency will change as well. Currently, the national leader's 5 years in office start with a presidential election, which is then followed by a local election and a general election. The government's proposal will have the presidential and local elections take place concurrently, starting 4 years from now, the general election serving as a midterm evaluation. However, the ability of the president to serve a second term if re-elected doesn't necessarily mean more power to the executive. In fact, the government's amendment would significantly curtail presidential power. For example, as of now, the Constitution gives both the executive and the legislature the authority to introduce bills. That would change. The government's proposal gives more authority over legislation to the National Assembly. The president will still be able to submit a bill, but only with the consent of 10 or more lawmakers. Also, the government's bill seeks to change the president's formal international role. The president will no longer be called the head of state, but rather a representative of the state to foreign nations. The government included those changes to respond to a public outcry over the high concentration of power in the presidency and the corruption seen to result from that. The government's bill will also lower the voting age to 18. Until now, it was 19, contingent on laws passed by the Assembly. The Blue House ended by urging the National Assembly to comply with the people's demands and fully review and discuss the government's proposal, and if necessary, Parliament should propose its own amendment. The government will submit its proposal on Monday. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, it's becoming the new normal here in South Korea. Fewer couples tying the knot. It's largely due to economic factors like low pay, poor job security and a lack of affordable housing. Unfortunately, in a nation desperate for more babies, the trend looks set to continue this year. Won Jung-hwan reports.
As young people delay their marriage in South Korea, the number of people getting married per 1,000 fell to its lowest level last year since data first started being compiled in 1970.
According to a government report on Wednesday, the number of people tying the knot has gradually decreased since 2011, hitting its lowest degrees in 2017 with less than 270,000 marriages, down of 6.1% from a year earlier.
The data also showed that the average age of marriage for Korean men reached a record high of 32.9 years in 2017, while the average age of first-time brides stood at 30.2 years, a significant rise from the average of less than 28 years almost a decade ago. And here are some of the reasons why people think young Koreans are delaying their marriage.
While a lot of people want to settle down in Seoul and prefer not to live outside of the capital, the cost of living in Seoul, including housing, is very expensive. And I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of people have to postpone their marriage.
Of course, there is an issue of the unemployment rate, but there is also a tendency in the country that many young people want to work for big corporations. I feel that these factors could contribute to young people delaying their marriage as they cannot find a good-paying job amid a tough employment market.
Unfortunately, according to a senior director from a well-known matchmaking company, it seems that delaying marriage is likely to continue further.
I think this falling trend will continue for the time being. This is because even though the population in South Korea is decreasing, the average age of marriage is increasing every year by a margin of 0.2 to 0.5 years due to the changing perception of early marriage.
He says that although people could be more open-minded about using services like matchmaking companies to find a partner, the government also has a key role to play in tackling the country's low marriage rate.
While the government policies have been much focused upon childcare and birth, I believe there should be more campaigns that could encourage marriage among young couples as well. In Singapore, for example, when a couple gets married, the government provides support with their purchase of a house.
Social and economic factors like an unstable economy and high youth unemployment appear to be combining with changing perception of marriage among young Koreans. This trend is a worrying concern, as some experts predict that by 2025, 1 out of 10 50-year-old women in Korea will have spent their lives without tying the knot. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
Now for a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we're going to start in Japan this morning. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party has decided to go ahead with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's proposal to amend the country's pacifist constitution that has been in place since the end of the Second World War. For more, we turn again to our man who has the world covered, our Noah Aram. So Aram, fill us in.
Yes, Mark. Abe has long wanted to change Article 9 to add an explicit reference to Japan's self-defense forces. LDP lawmakers have been discussing the issue for months, with some suggesting Article 9 should also have a paragraph banning a Japanese military with, quote, war potential to be removed. Others are opposed to that idea, as it could bring public backlash and raise concerns that Japan is moving away from its pacifist post-war stance. After a meeting on the issue on Thursday, however, the LDP did agree to create a new article called Article 9-2, the section that states the SDF shall be maintained as an armed organisation for Japan to take necessary self-defence measures. A two-thirds majority in both chambers of the parliament, followed by a majority support in a national referendum, is needed to amend the constitution. At least 14 people have been killed by a car bomb outside a busy hotel in Somalia's capital that was followed by gunfire. The Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militants claimed responsibility for Thursday's attack. Officials said the blast struck a street filled with civilians and also left about 10 others injured. The attack comes about a month after a twin car bombing in Mogadishu killed 38. Al-Shabaab carries out frequent bombings and other attacks in and around the capital in a campaign to topple Somalia's Western-backed federal government. The founder of Toys R Us has died a week after the company announced it was forced to shut down its US operations. Charles Lazarus, who founded Toys R Us 70 years ago, was 94 years old. Lazarus started the company when he was just 25, hoping the post-war baby boom would create demand for baby supplies and toys. Recognized as the man who transformed the toy industry from seasonal to year-round, Lazarus remained the firm's CEO until 1994.
Good morning. Seoul and Beijing will be covered with toxic smog all day today, and Beijing will have unhealthy levels of pollution while Tokyo will have normal air quality. So those of us in the capital area shouldn't spend too much time outdoors, as fine dust levels will remain high all day today. And the spring chill will come to an end this afternoon, so expect much milder temperatures. But it seems like we are going to have dusty times at times this weekend. Highs will be nearing the mid-teens in most parts, and Seoul and Daejeon will be topping out at 13 degrees Celsius, while Chuncheon and Gyeongju will be getting up to 14 and 15 degrees respectively. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. So many parts of South Korea will notice much milder highs in the afternoon with high levels of fine dust at times. Most parts of North Korea will have sunny skies on this Friday. And as for the rest of Asia, New Delhi is also blanketed with toxic smog as well, with a scorching heat of 31 degrees Celsius. In fact, those of you in Melbourne should enjoy some perfect weather conditions today, but the city could see heavy rain over the weekend. And heading to North America, Washington, D.C. will be breezy and cold through Friday, with the possibility of snow Saturday night. And as for South America, most cities on the map will be under bright skies except Bogota. Taking you to Europe, major cities will have sunny skies to rain or even snow, depending on the region. Lastly, to Africa, Cairo will be steamy hot with a high of 39 degrees Celsius. And that's all the weather update for now.
And that's where we're going to leave the news for now. Our next bulletin is coming up at noon Korea time. So until then, goodbye.